In this episode, we're going to look at why advertising ecosystems create some of the hardest privacy problems to control, especially when tracking follows people across sites and apps. Advertising can sound like a simple exchange where a business pays to show a message, but modern ad delivery is a complex web of companies, identifiers, auctions, and measurement tools that often operate outside the user's awareness. Cross-site profiling is what happens when activity from many different places is stitched together into a single story about a person, including what they read, what they buy, what they search, and what they might be persuaded by. Even when each single event looks small, the combined picture becomes sensitive because it can reveal habits, vulnerabilities, and patterns of life. Privacy engineering matters here because the technical defaults of ad systems tend to maximize collection and linkage, and taming that behavior requires deliberate design choices that keep influence and surveillance from becoming the unspoken cost of using the internet. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPT.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. To tame this space responsibly, you first need a clear mental model of what the advertising ecosystem actually is. Many people imagine a single advertiser and a single website, but real advertising commonly involves publishers who show ads, advertisers who pay for results, and multiple intermediaries who decide which ad appears and how success is measured. Those intermediaries may include demand-side platforms and supply-side platforms, and the more layers involved, the more data can move and the harder it becomes to trace where it went. Each layer is motivated to collect enough signals to target, measure, and optimize, which tends to push systems toward more identifiers, more sharing, and longer retention. For privacy, the problem is not advertising itself, but the incentives that make cross-site tracking feel like the easiest path to better performance. When you understand the incentive structure, you can design guardrails that limit the most invasive behaviors while still supporting legitimate business goals like basic measurement and fraud prevention. A good beginner definition of cross-site profiling is simple. It is the creation of a persistent identity that survives across different websites or apps, so separate actions can be linked over time and across contexts. This linking can happen through cookies in browsers, advertising identifiers on mobile devices, and other techniques that attempt to keep continuity even when users did not explicitly sign in. Once continuity exists, an ecosystem can build a profile that predicts interests, likely purchases, and sometimes sensitive traits based on browsing patterns. The privacy risk is amplified because the profile is often created without a direct relationship between the person and the intermediaries who receive the data. A person might trust a news site, but they may not even know which advertising companies learned about their visit. Taming cross-site profiling starts by treating linkage itself as a high-risk capability that must be minimized, scoped, and justified, not as a default feature of the business. One reason this area is so tricky is that ad tracking often hides inside ordinary page and app functionality. A web page loads content, images, and scripts, and some of those scripts are advertising or analytics components that send data to third parties. A mobile app might include a software development kit, SDK, that provides advertising or measurement features, and that SDK may communicate with networks and partners beyond the app developer's direct control. These components can collect device details, approximate location, and event data that can be used to target ads or measure conversions. From a privacy engineering perspective, the key risk is not only what data is collected, but where it is sent and how many parties receive it. The more third-party code runs inside your environment, the more you are effectively inviting external data collection into your product's core. Taming the ecosystem, therefore, begins with inventory and control, knowing what third-party components exist, what they transmit, and whether their behavior aligns with what you can defend. Another foundational concept is the difference between first-party and third-party contexts, because privacy expectations often track that boundary. First-party generally refers to the site or service the user intentionally interacts with, while third-party refers to external entities embedded within that experience. Users tend to expect that the first-party service needs some data to function, but they do not expect dozens of third parties to observe them as they read or shop. Cross-site profiling thrives in third-party contexts because the same third party can appear on many different sites, allowing it to collect signals across a wide range of activities. Privacy engineering aims to reduce the ability of third parties to act as silent observers by limiting what identifiers they can access and by limiting what events are shared. This does not require pretending third parties do not exist. It requires making their access narrower, more transparent, and more constrained by purpose. When the third-party surface is reduced, the system becomes less like a public sidewalk of trackers and more like a controlled space with rules. Measurement is where many teams accidentally justify invasive tracking because they want to know whether advertising worked. Measuring effectiveness is legitimate, but the privacy danger comes when measurement relies on persistent identity and detailed behavior histories. A helpful way to tame this is to separate coarse measurement from person-level tracking. Coarse measurement asks questions like how many people clicked, how many purchases happened after a campaign, and whether overall trends changed, without trying to follow one person across many contexts. Person-level tracking tries to connect a specific impression to a specific later action by the same individual, often requiring cross-site identifiers. The more you insist on precise attribution at the individual level, the more you push the system toward surveillance. Privacy-respecting measurement often uses aggregated reporting, shortened retention, and minimized identifiers, accepting a bit of uncertainty in exchange for reducing tracking power. If you can still make good business decisions with less precision, that trade-off is usually worth it for trust and defensibility. A core privacy risk in advertising ecosystems is the uncontrolled spread of identifiers, because identifiers are what make cross-site profiling possible. Identifiers can be obvious, like an email address, or less obvious, like cookie IDs, device advertising IDs, and combinations of signals that act like a fingerprint. When identifiers are shared with multiple parties, they become the connective tissue that allows profiles to be merged and enriched. Even if you send only a pseudonymous ID, it can still be matched against other data sources to rebuild identity or infer sensitive traits. Privacy engineering tries to reduce identifier sharing by avoiding unnecessary third-party calls, limiting the field sent, and scoping identifiers so they cannot be used as universal keys across unrelated contexts. Another important tactic is reducing stability, because stable identifiers enable long-term dossiers, while short-lived or context-specific identifiers limit how much history can be built. When identifiers are constrained, the ecosystem's ability to profile weakens, and that is the practical goal. Data minimization is particularly important in ad contexts because events and metadata often carry more information than teams realize. A single page view can reveal a topic of interest, and the combination of many page views can reveal a person's concerns, routines, and even moments of crisis. Query parameters, refer URLs, and page titles can leak sensitive content, such as medical topics, legal questions, or relationship issues, even when nobody intended to share that level of detail. Privacy engineering counters this by designing event schemas that avoid embedding sensitive content, by stripping unnecessary details from URLs, and by limiting transmission of refer data to third parties. It also means being cautious about sending precise location, full user agent strings, or other high-entropy signals that support fingerprinting. Minimization here is not abstract. It is the difference between sharing someone viewed an article and sharing someone in this exact place at this exact time read this exact sensitive topic. When you reduce event detail, you reduce profiling power. Consent and user control are often discussed in advertising, but privacy engineering treats them as meaningful only if the underlying system behavior changes accordingly. If a person opts out of targeted advertising, but the product continues to send detailed events to multiple third parties, the person may still feel tracked, and the practical risk may remain. The point of control is to constrain data flows, not merely to change how ads are selected. A privacy-respecting system aligns choices with data pathways by disabling non-essential third-party tracking when a person declines, and by avoiding the collection of signals that exist solely for profiling. It also avoids bundling choices so that a person must accept profiling to access basic functionality, because that undermines the idea of a real choice. Even for beginners, the principle is clear. The user's decision should actually reduce collection and sharing, not just change labels in a preference screen. Another way to tame advertising risk is to design stronger boundaries around third-party code and data movement. When third-party scripts and SDKs can execute freely, they can collect data in ways you did not anticipate, and they can change behavior over time through updates. Privacy engineering therefore treats third-party components as high-risk dependencies that require tighter review, limited permissions, and constrained integration points. Instead of allowing third-party code to observe everything, you can route events through controlled interfaces that enforce minimization rules, strip sensitive fields, and limit identifiers. This approach also improves accountability because it makes it easier to know what was shared and to change sharing behavior when requirements change. Boundaries become especially important when multiple vendors are involved because one vendor's data sharing can become another vendor's enrichment source. The more you can keep data movement deliberate and narrow, the less likely your system becomes an accidental contributor to broad profiling. Cross-site profiling risk also increases when datasets are combined behind the scenes in a data lake or warehouse, because internal aggregation can mirror external tracking. If an organization collects advertising events, website behavior, app activity, and customer records and joins them into a unified profile, it can create the same feeling of surveillance even if data never leaves the company. That internal profile can then be used for targeting, segmentation, and personalized persuasion, which can drift into manipulation if left unchecked. Privacy engineering counters this by limiting joins, scoping identifiers, and creating purpose-bound datasets so marketing and advertising use cases do not automatically inherit support data, security data, or other sensitive context. It also means keeping measurement datasets focused on campaign performance at a group level rather than on building individual dossiers. When internal aggregation is constrained, external ad systems also tend to receive less sensitive fuel. Taming the ecosystem, therefore, includes taming your own internal desire to connect everything. Fraud prevention is often raised as a reason for broad advertising data collection, and it is a legitimate concern because ad ecosystems attract abuse. The privacy challenge is that anti-fraud techniques can drift into broad device fingerprinting and long-lived tracking if they are not constrained. A privacy-aware approach separates anti-fraud signals from marketing profiling signals and limits how long fraud signals are kept and how widely they are shared. It also avoids using fraud as a justification for collecting unrelated behavioral detail, because that mixes purposes and expands surveillance under the cover of security. Even when certain network information is needed, like Internet Protocol, IP, address information, it can often be handled in reduced or short-lived forms that support detection without preserving long-term tracking. The key is proportionality. Collect what is necessary to detect abuse, but do not let anti-fraud become a permanent excuse for identity persistence. When fraud controls are scoped and auditable, they are easier to defend and less likely to become profiling infrastructure. Another major risk in advertising ecosystems is data brokerage and onward sharing, because data can travel far beyond the original site or app. Once data is shared with an advertising partner, it may be combined with other sources, resold, or used to build segments that persist long after the original interaction. Even if contracts say certain things, practical control can be difficult because enforcement depends on visibility into systems you do not operate. Privacy engineering responds by reducing what you share in the first place, choosing partners carefully, and limiting data to what is necessary for a defined purpose. It also means being precise about what data is considered sensitive and ensuring those categories are not shared at all, rather than trusting downstream parties to handle them perfectly. A defensible posture recognizes that every additional recipient increases the chance of misuse and increases the difficulty of honoring deletion or correction requests. When you limit onward sharing, you limit the ways cross-site profiles can become permanent and unaccountable. A common beginner misunderstanding is to assume that if advertising IDs are not names, they are harmless, but advertising IDs can still enable tracking and can often be linked back to identity through other means. Another misunderstanding is to think that targeting is always about showing relevant ads, when in reality targeting can be about influence, and influence can become exploitative when it is tuned to inferred vulnerabilities. There is also a misconception that privacy risk is only about third parties, when internal marketing systems can build equally invasive profiles. Privacy engineering counters these misunderstandings by focusing on capabilities rather than labels. Can this system follow a person across contexts? Can it infer sensitive traits? And can it shape experiences in ways the person would not expect? When the capability is there, risk is there, even if the identifier looks anonymous, and even if the system is only used for marketing. The goal of taming advertising ecosystems is to reduce those capabilities to a level that can be justified and explained without hand-waving. When you tame advertising ecosystems and cross-site profiling risk responsibly, you do it by combining technical limits, workflow discipline, and honest measurement goals. You understand the ecosystem incentives and design your integration so third-party access is narrow, minimized, and controlled through deliberate interfaces. You reduce identifier sharing, reduce stability, and avoid sending high-entropy signals that enable fingerprinting and linkage across contexts. You choose aggregated, privacy-respecting measurement methods when possible and treat individual-level attribution as a high-risk choice that requires strong justification. You align user choices with real data flow changes, so opting out actually reduces collection and sharing rather than merely changing a setting label. You also constrain internal aggregation so your own systems do not become cross-context profiling engines, and you treat fraud prevention as a scope purpose rather than a blanket excuse for tracking. The end result is an advertising posture that still supports business goals, but does so with boundaries that respect people as more than targets, and that can stand up to scrutiny when someone asks how you prevented advertising from turning into surveillance.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.